Hello, welcome to NeoScribe. Wealth management experts from Merrill Lynch, the wealth management division of Bank of America, predicts that the space economy will be worth close to $3 trillion in 30 years. But who really knows how large the space economy will be by then? In 1943, Thomas Watson, the president of IBM, thought that the global market for computers was maybe 5. In his defense, computers were powered by vacuum tubes, they looked like this, and the transistor was still 4 years away from being invented. My point is that history proves that we are only limited by our imaginations. The future space economy is filled with so much potential, such as asteroid mining, space tourism, and the colonization of Mars and establishing outposts on the Moon and even Venus. Realizing this potential is already in the works with the efforts of SpaceX Mars colonization plans. But for the rest, it begins with the commercialization of low Earth orbit. The commercialization of low Earth orbit is an actual directive of NASA, based on the NASA Transition Authorization Act of 2017, a bill sponsored by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and signed into law by President Trump on March 21, 2017. Section 303, Part C, Item 1 of the NASA Transition Authorization Act of 2017 states, "The administrator, in coordination with the ISS management entity, ISS partners, the scientific user community, and the commercial space sector, shall develop a plan to transition in a stepwise approach from the current regime that relies heavily on NASA sponsorship to a regime where NASA could be one of many customers of a low Earth orbit, non-governmental human spaceflight enterprise." End quote. In other words, the government wants to do two main things. First, they want to shift NASA's resources from the ISS to other areas, such as deep space exploration systems and advanced exploration systems, to name a few. Second, the government wants to hand over spaceflight activities in low Earth orbit to private industry. Before we get into low Earth orbit commercialization, let's get a deeper understanding of how much of the government's resources goes into spaceflight operations and low Earth orbit. You see, the current administration wants to end support of the ISS program by 2025. In 2017, NASA spent over $4.9 billion in low Earth orbit and spaceflight operations, which centers around the ISS program. The ISS program itself cost NASA $1.4 billion in 2017. $1.1 billion of that went to ISS systems operations, and the rest goes to ISS research, which I will cover in a minute. $1.1 billion for ISS systems operations seems crazy, but the ISS holds the Guinness World Record for the most expensive man-made object at a final cost of $100 billion. The ISS is a state-of-the-art research facility in space, and its living and working area is larger than a 6-bedroom house and includes 6 sleeping quarters, 2 bathrooms, and a gym. Over 50 computers control the station's systems, with over 4 million lines of code, both on the ground and at the station. Onboard software monitors around 350,000 sensors, ensuring health and safety of the crew and the station. So that $1.1 billion goes to the engineers and operators that analyze and develop solutions to system failures. There are ground teams in place 24/7 to attend to any failure that may occur, to monitor the performance of the station, the vehicle systems, life support, robotic systems, crew equipment, propulsion, thermal control, guidance, navigation, among other elements. And an even bigger chunk of the low Earth orbit spaceflight operations goes towards space transportation, which cost over $2.5 billion in 2017. Space transportation centers around the development of transportation systems and transporting astronauts and cargo safely to and from the ISS, and is broken up into 2 parts: the crew and cargo program at $1.4 billion and the commercial crew program at $1.1 billion. The crew and cargo program focuses on the delivery of crew and cargo to and from the ISS. Cargo deliveries are completed through the Commercial Resupply Service, or CRS, contracts, and it involves SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon cargo vehicle, Orbital ATK's Antares rocket and Cygnus cargo, and beginning in 2019 will include Sierra Nevada's Dream Chaser cargo vehicle on board the ULA's Atlas V rocket. For transporting crew to the ISS, NASA currently buys seats on the Russian Soyuz vehicle at a price of $80 million per person. But eventually NASA astronauts will travel to and from the ISS on SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket and Crew Dragon spacecraft and Boeing's CTS-100 Starliner on board ULA's Atlas V. And then the Commercial Crew Program focuses on the development of crew transportation systems. Although NASA spent $1.1 billion on the program in 2017, that will drop to around $170 million in 2019, and then down to around $36 million in 2020. The third major area of NASA's low Earth orbit spaceflight operations is space and flight support, costing around $900 million. I won't go into this because these expenses will most likely still be around after 2025. Now let's go back to ISS research, which is why astronauts go to the ISS and is what drives majority of NASA's low Earth orbit and spaceflight operation expenses. The cost of the research on the ISS was just $347 million. Yes, that's a lot of money, but it only amounts to 7% of the low Earth orbit spaceflight operations costs. And this is why NASA and the government at large wants to commercialize low Earth orbit, because they are financially handcuffed to supporting the ISS platform, where only 7% of the cost goes to actual research. It's important to know that NASA does not want to abandon research in low Earth orbit. Going back to the NASA Transition Authorization Act of 2017, NASA will work towards facilitating a self-sustaining private human spaceflight enterprise where NASA is just one of many customers. Aside from research, NASA will have many reasons to access low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit is a cost-effective environment for astronauts to gain the experience needed for deep space missions. Astronauts will gain and maintain proficiencies in a variety of spaceflight skills, such as launches, vehicle proximity operations, docking, and extravehicular activity. As stated in their ISS transition report, in order to access low Earth orbit for these reasons after the ISS is gone, NASA has a vision where there are at least one or more privately owned and operated space stations that are sustained primarily on commercial revenue and not NASA and the government at large. To help with this process, NASA and possibly international space agencies will share the cost of a commercial space station. NASA will focus on three main areas: policy, enabling commercial supply, and enabling demand. Policy involves working with the National Space Council to establish initiatives that would involve other government agencies besides NASA that would utilize commercial low Earth orbit platforms. This area involves identifying marketplace needs in low Earth orbit so they can assist businesses with commercialization. NASA is also assessing their policy on implementing a commercial module on the ISS so that companies can explore ideas for new applications in microgravity so that they can test out their business prospects. And in order to do this, NASA must develop a pricing structure for ISS services that do not exist today. The second area of focus is enabling commercial supply, and this is about developing a healthy commercial supplier base, which for the most part is already in place with the Crew and Cargo program, but this area also includes plans to shift ISS research functions to commercial space stations once available. And the third and most important area is enabling demand. For this area, NASA wants low Earth orbit activities to expand from being a research and satellite-based economy to a self-sustaining low Earth orbit economy representing a broad array of economic sectors. In 2016, the Science and Technology Policy Institute, or STPI, conducted a preliminary assessment on potential revenue-producing activities. They identified 21 activities that could generate revenue on a commercial space station, and these activities fall into 5 categories. First are habitats for space tourism and astronauts, and STPI estimates that the potential annual revenue for this category range between $66 and $230 million. The second category is supporting the satellite sector, such as on-orbit assembly of satellites, which is beneficial since the satellites will not have to be launched into orbit. The annual revenue estimates for this category range between $21 and $395 million. The third category is fascinating and involves manufacturing products in low Earth orbit, and revenue estimates range between $310 and $419 million. The driving force of this category is manufacturing high-value exotic optical fibers in low Earth orbit, produced from a heavy metal fluoride glass called Zeblan. You see, there was a NASA-sponsored experiment done by in-space manufacturing company Made in Space that demonstrated that optical fibers produced in space have better optical qualities than most fiber optic wires produced using silica. This is because Zeblan's atomic structure crystallizes on Earth's gravity. And in microgravity, it doesn't do so as much. Anyway, the fourth category is self-explanatory and is research and development and Earth observation, with estimated annual revenue between 28 and 42 million. And the fifth category is media, advertising, and education, with estimated annual revenue between 32 and 102 million dollars. So there are plenty of commercial opportunities in low Earth orbit available, and chances are there are others that haven't even been thought about yet. Now let's talk about the platforms that will provide the environment for these opportunities. There are at least 3 companies already working on commercial space stations. There's Bigelow Aerospace, who's already developed incredible space habitat module technology that expands in space. The Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, known as BEAM, was launched and delivered to the ISS and is being used as a storage room for astronauts. What's exciting about Bigelow Aerospace is that they already have the technology and they've demonstrated it, and they are now developing even bigger and better habitats in the coming years. And then there's Orionspan and Axiom Space. This video is getting long, so I decided to make the commercialization of low Earth orbit a 4-part series. Part 2 will focus on the commercial space stations, where I will go in depth on Bigelow and Axiom Space. I've already done a whole video on Orionspan, so if you want to check that out in the meantime, there's a link to the video in the description, or look for this thumbnail on my video list. And Part 3 will zero in on entities that are already generating revenue on orbit, such as NanoRacks, Space Tango, TechShot, and many more. Finally, Part 4 is tentative depending on the responses I receive, but most of this will come from you guys. You see, Sam Samimi, the ISS director at NASA headquarters, was asked in an interview last week if he envisioned commercial space stations in the near future. He said, "It's easy to envision the supply. We have in this country more supply than customers. What really needs to be worked on is the development of the demand." So this is why I need your help. I want your ideas for possible revenue sources. Think outside the box. I have some ideas myself that I'll save for later, but who knows, maybe we can help with this cause, putting our ideas out there, because the commercialization of space would be awesome. Alright, that's all I have for now. I hope you enjoyed your journey. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. I am NeoScribe, and I'll see you on the next journey. Hey guys, this was another fun video to make. I initially intended to make this video about Bigelow, but I felt it was important to shift focus on NASA's transition from the ISS. And then I realized I needed to tie all the pieces together, so I'm excited for this mini-series. Because while SpaceX Mars colonization plans is what I'm most excited about in space, I think the commercialization of low Earth orbit has the potential to be awesome. I am aiming to complete Part 2 by early August, Part 3 by mid-September, and then Part 4 by late September. I'm really excited to see what ideas we can come up with. If you're new to my channel, I like to alternate topics between space and various technology topics, so I will be spreading the series out. And now I'd like to thank Hugo Katz for pledging on Patreon. You are awesome. And if you connect with my content and want to help support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon page in the description. You can pledge as little as $1 a month. Every bit helps. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next time.